last week I was looking to one philosopher referring to Plato's ideas about government. I was always aware that I think he viewed democracy rather dimly, which is strange because everybody's very positive about it these days. But he was pointing out, just a bit further in Plato, that, for example, you can have a philosophical monarchy or you can have a warrior culture like the Spartans, and these you could call spiritual cultures. Like even the Spartans is a honour-based society. But democracy is a sort of materialistic society. And it is very good at producing wealth. But democracy, I think according to Plato, he was claiming, is largely about the appetites. And it's very good with creating stuff for people's appetites. And when it starts off, there's an element in democracy where there is still that sense of honour. People have the idea about society being all for one and one for all. And you'll have still fairly good leadership, say somebody like Pericles. But as you go down the line, people become more and more orientated towards their personal appetites. And it becomes every bugger for themselves. And I remember loosely, I think it was Plato's claim, and eventually, of course, of pseudo-Platonism, that the voting public will vote for the society to gift them with goodies, which is very strong at the moment. And this is the final stage of democracy, because eventually the culture or the society is driven into debt. The government is driven into debt. And at this point, the tyrants arises. And I keep on telling people that when you talk about democracy, if that's true, you're looking at the past. You're now in the new world. But further, I was just going to, say something in this first line. Jesus was a moral genius. And I'm very interested in that distinction between facts and values. And of course, morals are a value. For example, in physics, we deal with what we would call facts. And more or less, theoretically, we would all come up with the same or very similar facts. But where we can differ is our values. We could have very different morals. From what I can understand, rationalist thought is about how you can apply rationales which work very well with physics to the values and ideas which arise from the subjective mind. So my vision of the rationalist is somebody who believes that there's internal thoughts, some of which are true like physics, and there's other thoughts which are just nonsense. This is this discriminating element of rationalism. Of course, the idealists might believe in the nonsense, but the rationalists are a bit, I'm not going to follow every ideal. Some values seem to be a bit like facts, and other values are just nonsense. Thank you. But I was wondering what you think about the fate of democracy.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, whenever, I guess when Aristotle writes that there's two different democracies, not one wonders if he isn't writing that as a response to Plato. Certainly in many places, Aristotle is trying to stick it to his teacher. But Aristotle's basically flat out says you have to, the quest, you can't just say that, the large numbers of people start out voting, for good reasons and then gradually vote for appetites. He says the question is who's voting? Do the people who are voting have sophrosyne, or do they not have sophrosyne? Because if they have sophrosyne, then they're voting for, the greater health and vitality of both the individual and the group at the same time. That paradox that moderns can't quite parse. But if they lack sophrosyne, then yeah, they're going to be voting for either their appetites or their ideologies, whatever possesses them, and prevents them from focusing on what gives us health and vitality. And so for that reason, he uses two different terms. Democracy, he uses that word which we like, he uses that word to refer to the bad democracy. That's when it's just a bunch of people and you just ask 6 lions on a zebra what they want for lunch, and then you're surprised at the outcome. He said, but he used another term, which I forget. I have to look it up. I've been meaning to look it up for the last couple of months, but I always forget by the time we get to the end of these seminars. But he used a separate term for a democracy in which the people who are voting are people who have sophrosyne. Because in that case, they're voting for not just the majority good, but the greater good, in the sense of, how do we increase the health not only of the majority but of the whole group and all of the individuals within it. Where do you find that, what Heraclitus calls the hidden harmony that pulls it all together? And it's harder to do. So there's a reason why people who don't engage at that level of thinking, they don't want to do it. They want to they either just want to vote for their appetites because that's easy. Look, I'm hungry, I want to vote for some food. Or they vote for their ideologies. Look, I have a recipe that tells me what to think. Don't try to make me actually think. I'm just going to calculate on this recipe and that'll tell me how to vote. My party is the good party, your party's the bad party, so I'm going to vote against you and vote for me. That kind of ideological thinking. So I guess I do this a lot now. It was only about 6 months ago that I really, when we were going through the ancient civ section in chapter 4, it's about 6 months ago that I really hit on the central importance of sophrosyne for the Greeks. I mean, I'd seen the term before and I knew it was one of those good things, but I didn't understand how for them the answer to almost every question is it depends on the presence or absence of sophrosyne. And so that's how I respond to your very good question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think me that there's a process going. I think this is something I was coming up with about 20 years ago when I heard that there was this big division between the popular sides of politics in America. I have expressed it before, and if if America was going to follow the pattern that was seen in the decline of the Roman Republic, Rome was powerful. It had established an empire while it was still calling itself a republic. But there's a point where you either continue being a republic, a democracy of the sorts, or you become an empire and you get an emperor.
Yeah.
Some societies stick with the democracy and their empire falls apart, like Britain. And Rome decided to get an emperor and continue
Yeah.
expanding as an empire.
Yeah.
And I could foresee going by this that even though America might be still externally powerful, but was internally dividing. And I thought, well, maybe by the year 2030 or 2040, there would be a civil war. Now, this just went against my feelings. I'd been born in a culture in which such ideas were felt impossible. But then you look at history and you see what is perceived as the impossible will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things about the Constitutional Convention that created the US Constitution is a number of people coming out of it acknowledged that we were pretty deeply divided right from the get-go. And they were like hoping that later we could resolve those divisions, but instead they got worse. Um, and even the victory of the Civil War, in which we defeated the forces of slavery, that was about 5 years of Reconstruction before they did the compromise on the deadlocked vote for president, and they decided to let the South go back to slavery and everything but name for the next 100 years under Jim Crow. So the U.S. basically has had this fundamental split going all the way back to the beginning. And that's not counting all the other divisions. We've got plenty of divisions, but I mean that one has been there. That fault line's been there from the beginning. So it's one of the ways in which the United States, although it intentionally modeled itself on Rome, it actually was quite different from Rome. Um, Rome didn't have a division that deep going all the way back to the beginning. The other thing is that the Romans might have been the mafia of the ancient world, but they at least what they were trying to imitate. Mafiosi are always about I'm trying to create a classy impression. I'm trying to live up to some impression of what classiness looks like. Whatever I may do, behind closed doors, out in public, I'm trying to present an image. So, what is the image that is being presented? And in Rome, they felt like the image they had to present was that Greco-Roman enlightened, we are tethered to nature. We rule because we are naturally the best. We have the best character, and the person with the best character should rule. And we're ruling in favor of, health and vitality, vir, as in virtue. Whereas we always lacked that tether in the United States. We were sort of vaguely, tenuously tethered to deism, sort of a bit in the beginning, except those of us who weren't. Um, so what you get in the United States a lot, and we export this massively through propaganda, through news, through entertainment, and so on. We have a very strong brand. We've always pushed our brand, and we've believed our brand, but our brand has always been somewhere up here in the clouds, and the reality has always been a lot more practical.
Why I say all this was at the start. What I noticed when I was looking at the 2nd century was the huge change in the Romans, where say you have the Second Punic War, and they defeat the Carthaginians, but they allow Carthage to exist.
Right.
The
Right.
core of the Carthaginian state remains, the city remains.
Yes.
And for some reason, 50 years later, the magnificent appetite develops of revenge.
Right.
Revenge from people that weren't, well, some of them were hardly alive at the termination of the Second Punic War, and they desire, when at the time Carthage had hardly done anything to rile them, the complete and utter Holocaust.
Yes.
Somehow there was a huge change in the nature of the Romans in between, say, about 200 AD and, 200 BC and about 150 BC, within 50
Yes.
years. And when the guy said appetitive, that might explain it, that this was a Rome that was being consumed by its appetites. It had gone from a very much an honour-based system, or not a strong feeling of honour, towards the appetite. And the appetite said, burn Carthage, burn.
Yeah. But you see something similar in Athens, right? It's much discussed by Thucydides and other historians talking about what Athens is doing in the Peloponnesian War is so beneath the Athens of just a generation ago. What the hell happened? Why would they why would they make a mockery of the idea of using persuasion to resolve their disagreements when that used to be their claim to fame? Goddess of wisdom, right, rises above us and tells us how to behave. We're not just brutes. But then by the time of the Peloponnesian War, they're like, no, we are brutes, but we're bigger brutes than you are. So do what we say. It's an enormous collapse in the culture. And again, it
I
raises the
say
question.
beware the appetite.
And it could have been appetitive, right? I mean, that's Cornford's thesis in Thucydides Mythhistoricus, is that it's the rise of the merchant class greedily eyeing the Western Mediterranean and saying, how come we aren't in charge of that too? How come we're only in charge of the Eastern Mediterranean? No fair. What good is having all this power if we don't throw it around and get more power? That's appetitive, right? I mean, that's Cornford's assessment, and he asserts that that's Thucydides' assessment, that it's a decay of character. Um, Rome, I'm still learning this period. I still have more to learn about that, the period you're talking about. And what I can say is that it foreshadows what happens in internal politics, because it's not that long after 150 when the age of rhetoric starts to collapse, when people are like, I don't dare say in the most profound rhetorical, persuasive way possible what I think of my opponent, or he'll send someone to stick a sword in me. And that wouldn't have happened when in my youth, but it would happen now. It's like, what the hell has happened to our culture? So something happened in Rome. Maybe it was appetitive.
What year did you refer to? What 150 AD? You've seen some significance in that sort of era, or
The death of Cicero is the classic example.
oh
He
right, that's
he
about
starts his
a
career as this
century
amazing
later.
rhetorician, but he ends his career being murdered for his rhetoric. Uh, so I guess actually let's pull it up right now, right? 43 BCE, right? He's born circa 106. He grows, he flourishes. It's perfectly fine for him to be incredibly incisive and daggery in his rhetoric, for most of his career. But by the end of his career, it becomes so dangerous that eventually Mark Antony has him murdered. Um,
But the point was Cicero, of course. He was one of the gang, wasn't he, that murdered old Julius?
well, was Cicero involved in that directly, or was he not
Well,
involved directly?
not directly, but
He didn't actually
he
wield
was
it on.
behind the scenes, like working his magic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he flip-flopped towards Julius Caesar. I mean, there were times when he was critical of Caesar and gave great speeches against Caesar. And then there were other times when he flip-flopped and was pro Caesar's policy. He was kind of an opportunist. Is
There
the
would have been a lot of people like that around Caesar, I assume.
Yeah, I would assume so. So I'm still trying to, getting out of the abstractions. I'm still trying to pin down exactly what the hell happened to Rome between 200 BCE and let's say Cicero's death in 63. So
Well, I put it down to the Gracchi brothers was the case where violence appeared in the Senate, more or less. Yeah, you had the
yes,
violent action finally. Murder was on the Senate floor virtually.
the Gracchi brothers. Yes, I don't have a date on them right now.
Uh, I think something like about 133. The first one was murdered, and the second one about 121, I think it was.
Yeah,
BC.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, here's the link. I'll drop it in there for those who want to look. And I think you're right that's an inflection point in Roman violence when it moves. Not now we're not just sacking, Carthage. Now we're starting to murder senators. And you're right, that's right around. And it's only a decade or two um, after Carthage, isn't it? After the sacking of Carthage.
Well, a similar theme in the Greco world as well. You have Ptolemy Phison regains power, and he takes it out on the academics in the Great Library who had helped undermine him the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
People he felt had trusted. And when people talk about the decline of the Great Library, it didn't happen at the end of the Roman Empire. It happens then.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
suddenly these dictators, these tyrants realise that academics are a bad crowd, really. You really need to exile them to the edge of the empire where the barbarians are. If you want to be nice to them, or maybe you can put them on a small island and starve to death, something like that. Or you could be a little bit more direct.
Right. Right.
And suddenly, of course, in our own culture, we're starting to realise that our centres of academia might be a bit unworthy. Time to go to town on them.
Yeah. So there's a quote about dystopias that says dystopia is when the things that we do to other people start happening to us. You know what? It's fine if we treat people in other countries in miserable ways, but we'll be nice to each other. It's an unstable condition. People keep always opting for it. You know, it's like, okay, yeah,
And it's like the British Empire.
yes, chickens come home to roost, and we don't like that, but it's true. It's certainly what happens with the Romans, right? We're an expanding, conquering, murderous empire. But at home, we're all Roman citizens, and we insist on being treated, you know, with dignity. But that is an unstable relationship because it doesn't take long for some thug at some point to go, well, how come I can stick a sword into that guy when I don't like him, but I can't stick a sword into you? I'm just going to stick a sword into you. I mean, it doesn't take any great leap of creativity to bring home foreign policies and start applying them to each other. And Rome is
There's a
famous as a place that had that discrepancy.
there's a music video called "Murder on the Dance Floor," which was,
Oh,
one of those bouncy hits. And I think you could parody it with "Murder on the Senate Floor."
yes, somebody needs to make that video. Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I was going to try and put Stephen at ease. As I recall, for Plato, you have three forms of government: the one, the few, and the many, but they're arranged in 6 tiers. And the center is sort of a reflection point where you have from top to bottom one, few, many, many, few, one. And one of the points that Plato makes about this arrangement is what the ones above have good sophrosyne, we'll say, and the ones below don't. But the big thing to notice is the delta between the two tops, the two types with the same, that when a good king goes bad, you often get a horrible tyrant. You fall all the way to the bottom. The democracy or the few becomes the plutocracy or something, but democracy becomes a not so quite good version of democracy. It's he does credit democracy, or I think Plato does, that it's in a way the most stable. And by stable, the difference between the best forms and the worst forms are the smallest difference that you get. So, yeah, in some ways, democracy is the best kind of government because it can have long-term stability. Now, we'll have to see. We're at an unstable point right now, but they're clearly, like you'd say, plutocratic forces at work. So do we keep falling or do we oscillate around that reflective middle line? Anyway, that's what I.
Well, you wonder if the reason for the difference between Plato's assessment of democracy and Aristotle's has to do with what, 30 years of history that happened
Oh yeah,
kicking in
yeah,
right as Plato was writing. Everything was going to crap. It's like we might have
yeah,
written that differently 30 years later.
yeah. I think that they both clearly have the theme of how do you be a good man in bad times.
Yes. Yes.
Hannah Arendt took kind of that same theme up in the 20th century. Not, but it's
Yeah.
it's I think Aristotle had more success with Alexander than Plato had with Dionysius of Syracuse.
Yes.
Uh, I, but yeah, but
But how much was luck of the draw?
but it's clearly, I think I would have to say Aristotle's more explicit on the problem than Plato is. Plato is sort of, it's in the background, the collapse.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I was going to say a few weeks ago that during Trump's initial negotiations over Ukraine with Russia, I think in news accounts of that, I saw more unattributed paraphrases or quotes of the Malian, the powerful do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must.
Thucydides quote.
You
Yes.
know, right. So it's not a
Yeah.
good sign when that's the quote from Thucydides that's reflecting.
Yeah. Yeah. When that starts to break into pop culture, you know, your times are dire. They're like, we're even willing to quote this Greek
Right.
guy.
Right. Yeah, but that's
Not just
probably
quote
for
the philosopher.
Thucydides the proof that Athens has hit the bottom. That
Yeah.
it's, you know, the velvet glove on the iron fist is off.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's why the whole sequence that he writes about after that, the great fleet, the beautiful, glorious ships all decorated and all of the best and the brightest manning them and sailing off to Syracuse, never to be seen again. It's like, you know, they thought by taking off the velvet glove, now is going to be our heyday. We're going to rise to triumph. And instead they went down to the bottom of the Mediterranean. That was the end of them. Uh, it's that, I mean, Nietzsche's right? Power makes stupid. It's that thing where you feel your oats and you can't, they prevent you from seeing your actual circumstances, right? I mean, the party backing the Syracuse expedition really believed it was possible. We'll just sail over there and conquer them. We'll just do that. Who can stop us? And you know, it showed a wild misevaluation of reality at a time when Athens really should have known better. But now we go back to what Stephen said. It's appetitive, right? They're whereas as Cornford says, Thucydides says, it's the problem is hope, elpis. They had this hope and vision. They could imagine how cool it would be if they conquered Syracuse and then Sicily and then from there Carthage. And wouldn't that be great? And the image of that beautiful possibility came to drown out the reality they were living in which that was crazy talk. Crazy talk. They weren't that strong. They couldn't do that. It was a terrible idea.
You have to
That's
watch out for the other guy who has the opposite imagination.
Right? I mean, that's where that leads. I mean, it's only a few centuries later that Rome conquers Greece, and when they do, they mention we've been here before. You tried this on us, didn't you? Where this is us getting you back. We owe you one, and here it comes. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, from this three types of political regimes, and each one has a good side and a bad side. It almost seemed to indicate that Sparta, in a way, much more democratic than Athens. I mean, like they have a council, they have check and balances. But does that alone make it a good government when they have slavery to that nth degree and they throw young children who couldn't quite make it into the pit? I mean, there has to be something else besides the governance. I mean, that something else is there has to be some relationship to respecting or at least tolerating others to a certain degree. I suppose that you have a person that's creating a rebellion, then that's going beyond the limits. But I think one of the problems is that we don't have enough respect for tolerance and respect for others. I think that's a deep issue. I mean, because it's not just a matter of what you want. It has something to do with what others could tolerate in a society. I suppose you could, just, I guess, decommission them in the society and exile them. But yeah, I think that's what the problem of Athens is, because it seems to me right at the time of Plato, he already realized that, and he says that we got to get out from under this situation, because there was a time, not that the greatest span before, that Athens was a good city, and it just deteriorated. So I said, no matter how you argue it, I would hate to say that, oh yeah, I prefer Sparta over Athens. Although Sparta does seem to stand up for something, rather than because Sparta actually came to the help of Greece, during the wars. Maybe I shouldn't say Greece, but that has a lot to do with kind of external pressures too. I mean, when you have the Persian, you have to rally as many people as you can to fight against the Persians. I think is it a problem that Greece never united as a single concept in a language, and it took Alexander, yeah, to see that there was a unity. But I don't know whether the problem that Greece fell because Alexander died very young. He might have stood up for all of Greece, even though he's a Macedonian. But Alexander was, even though he was in many ways a nice guy, he was into building empires too. So there seems to be a contradiction. But that empire, if it was held together, it would have been pretty good, The library at Alexandria and all that stuff was a good push. So yeah, I think are we faced with the same thing? I mean, like, we now have this big commotion about who's a head honcho in the world. The United States still have the power. I don't know whether they have the right perspective. That's a problem. And I think when you have internal conflicts, it's much worse than having external conflicts, because it's right striking at the heart of the situation. That's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.